And I guess I might as well take this moment to just say we can all take a moment and make sure we silence those cell phones. So thank you for that reminder. So it's my pleasure to introduce Rebecca Hong. For 25 years, Rebecca's been an adventuring storyteller. And among other subjects, she tells stories about Chinese history right here in the Pacific Northwest. And she's going to be sharing one of those stories with us this evening. She's visiting us from her home in Shelton, Washington. And her passions include exploring back roads and out-of-way places and listening to others' stories. So tonight she's sharing with us a story about the owners of Kam Wong Chung in John Day, and it's a story about their commitment to their community and about its lasting legacy. And I wanted to tell you a little bit about tonight's event. It's made possible in part by the Oregon Historical Society, and it's in conjunction with their current exhibit that's called Beyond the Gate, A Tale of Portland's Historic Chinatowns. And the exhibit will be on display through June 21st, so if you have a chance to get up to Portland, I would really encourage you to check it out. And while you're there, you'll want to keep an eye out for some of the artifacts right here from the High Desert Museum that are on loan for that exhibit. The other thing I wanted to mention to you are two things from the Oregon Historical Society. One talks about their upcoming events, and it has their exhibit schedule on the other side. And the other thing is that in the back of the room, we have some evaluations from the night's program. So if you'd like to fill one of those out, I encourage you to do so. So with that, please join me in welcoming Rebecca Hong.
I'll be scrutinizing all those evaluations before they're turned over, okay? Limiting them. I need to give you a disclaimer just so we all know where we're at before we even start. I am not an historian. I am a storyteller. And isn't that what history is built around? His story, the story of the people that affected our lives, that affected our progress, right? And so that's what I am always interested in, that's what I look for. I look to try and make the facts and the realities of what happened into a personal, empathetic connection, so that you're not just seeing the facts, the story, the statistics, but that you're seeing that these were real live people who had big lives and complicated lives, just like all of us here, right? And that they tried to do the best they could, the way they saw it with what they had. All right. With that disclaimer, then, can we carry on?
No, we're right back.
Yeah, I was going to say, and does anybody want a refund? This story came about in the year 2010 for me. It started a lot earlier because I am married to and committed to a man of Chinese background. And when this little apple-cheeked girl moved out from Iowa, I really had no idea of the Chinese American culture and what Chinese immigrants had contributed in this country. It wasn't in any of my history books there in Jessup, Iowa. And so that started that whole process of learning and digging and beginning to understand. Right? And Dale has been always a great instructor, teacher, encourager, prodder for me to know more. Would you like to stand up? Everybody kind of wants to see who you are. So speaking of prodding, it was in 2010, and there was a tour organized of the Great American West, a 4-state tour that was going to start at the Wing Luke Asian Museum in Seattle and was going to go through Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Nevada, and stop at significant sites on public lands where there had been a Chinese presence, a Chinese immigrant, Chinese resident presence there. And of course, being prodded, Dale said to me, "Why don't you come along and tell stories on the bus?" And I said, "Who wants to hear me tell stories?" Because the largest majority of the people on that bus were of Chinese background and a Chinese heritage. And I thought, who am I to stand up and do this? And Dale said, because you can tell the stories. You need to stand up and tell them. You know, awkward. Do you feel just a little out of place sometimes, you know? But we took the bus. We started out in Seattle, and we went to John Day, Oregon. First stop. You know, it's a significant presence there in John Day, Oregon, when how many 50-some people of Asian ancestry get off the bus and walk through town. Yeah, noticeable, okay? And then, I'm just laying this all out really honestly, okay? Then we were invited to go to the Snaffle Bit, that's it, the Snaffle Bit restaurant. Snaffle Bit, you know, okay, it's a certain kind of bit for horses, right? But it was closed to everyone else except our group. Now, I'm not sure, was it open special for us? Or was it a closed special for us? You know, you're not quite sure. Were we being honored or excluded or what was going on for sure? And on top of all of that, as people were walking through town from the bus, they kept seeing these signs in the store windows. Just little Xerox, right? Copied posters that just said, "We stand united." Like united, like for what? Against what? And so everybody was just a little nervous and just a little tense about the whole situation. And you have to understand too that many of the people that were on this tour were urban folk who had never crossed the Cascade Mountains, had never come into Eastern Oregon or Washington or Nevada. Seattle, San Francisco, you know, all along the coast. And it wasn't so long ago, I'm really sad to say, that there were sundown laws in these towns east of the Cascades. And there were even the driving outs up in Tacoma and, you know, along the coast. There had been a lot of history and a lot of conflict and confrontation. And so to come into this town where people are going, "You're going over there? They hang people over there." And to see signs that say, "We stand united," everybody was a bit, first night. Are you there with me? Can you kind of feel some of what that might do, feel like? Okay. So we got everybody bedded down. at the Best Western Hotel. I got everybody into the rooms situated and whatnot. And I turned to Dale and I said, I need a beer. And so we started to walk toward what looked like a supermarket there in John Day. The door was locked. It closed at 9. It was now 9:10. No beer. There. No little quick stop anywhere. The town was quiet. But Dale and I had both spent time around in that area before. We had worked in the forest over outside of Prineville, up on the Ochoco Forest, and I had done a detail over at John Day. And that had been the first time that I had ever seen the Kam Wah Chung building. But at that time, it hadn't turned into the museum that it is today. It was just this old, closed-up, green building with red, cracked paint around the edges. So John Day had always felt like kind of a good place to me, actually. I had good memories of being there. So Dale and I decided we'd start walking around in the residential areas a little bit and walk through town, and we kept seeing these signs. We saw them on the storefronts, we saw them in a lot of the businesses, but then we also saw them in the residents. And the sign said, "We stand united." And then other ones next to it said, "United against hate." And I started to remember something I had heard in the news a few months earlier. Well, we went on into the Dirty Dog Saloon. It was the only place that was open there on the main street of John Day. When we walked in, everyone's head turned. Not from around here, are you? Dale and I sidled up to the 2 nearest bar stools closest to the door and ordered 2 PBRs, Pabst Blue Ribbon, on tap. Right? The barkeep, she pushes them to us, and we sit there keeping our own counsel, just talking to each other. And after a few minutes, all other 6 people in the bar settled down, didn't look at us anymore, and they started their own conversations, and the music from the jukebox was playing. And they just minding our own business. Now we had maybe a 1/4 inch of beer, 1 swallow left in the bottom of our glasses, when the fella there around the corner of the bar looked at me and said, "You know, you ought to play that game." What game? You know, costs a 1/4. You know, it's that game. You put the 5 die in the cup and you shake them. And if you win, you get that whole pot of money. And he pointed over to this glass jar that was full of silver and greenbacks. Cost a 1/4. I figured we had 2 quarters there from our change that we were going to leave for tip. I figured to keep harmony in the place and be able to walk out of the bar without any sort of a disruption, we could pay 50 cents. So Dale pushed his cord forward, took his turn, scooped up those 5 die. Nothing. Not even a pair, right? All right. Now, do you know how this game goes? It's kind of like Yahtzee. You scoop up the dice. And the barkeep says to me, "All right, now, if you get 3 of a kind, you get another turn." If you get 4 of a kind, you win $5. And if you get 5 of a kind, you win that whole pot of money. Okay, we had 1 quarter left. I pushed my quarter forward. I scooped up the dice. 3 ones. I get another roll. Scoop them up. By this time, everybody's starting to pay a little attention. I go, yeah, okay. Come on. Baby needs new shoes. Let's go. 3 twos. Another turn. Tell you what, if I win, I'll buy a round. I'll buy a round for all 6 of you. 5 threes. Scoop it in. Everybody's happy. All right. We count out the greenbacks. We push the silver over to the barkeep because it was going to be her tip anyway. So she got all the change. We bought a round for everybody, and I still put $250 into my pocket. Then that fella around the corner got real friendly. So, what are you doing in town? He said. Well, and you know, Dilhan plays things pretty close. Doesn't always say a lot about what he's doing and what his plans are. And he said, oh, we're on a tour. We're just coming through. Oh, said the guy, yeah, you know, yeah. It's a good town, real good town. He said, I used to live down in Bend, but I was in construction, and then when things kind of fell apart, you know, I came back home here to John Day, you know, move in and see if I can kind of get started here again. It's been tough, but, you know, it's a good town. So, yeah. He said, well, what kind of tour are you on? Where are you staying? I go, well, I'm not telling you where we're staying. I got $250 in my pocket here, you know? What kind of tour? Well, we're here on a great tour of the American West. And we're visiting these sites. You know, it's a tour with a Chinese heritage tour. This guy said, oh, really? You're on a tour here? You guys, you have to go to the Kam Wah Chung Museum. He didn't know that that was on our schedule, and that was the whole reason that we had come to John Day, was to go to the Kam Wah Chung Museum. But he said, you gotta go there. My grandma used to live right across the street from that place. Well, you see, in Kam Wah Chung Mercantile, the flowering, golden flower of prosperity, had stood there since 1888, when Long An and Ying He had met each other there in John Day and had established this business. The idea that these 2 men had met in 1888 is really quite remarkable. They both came from the Canton region of China, on the Toisan. But Ying He came from a very scholarly family and a rich family. No, I'm sorry, did I say Ying He? I meant Long An, I'm sorry. Long An had been a scholar and came from a wealthy family. He knew how to read and write. He was also fluent in English and could read and write also in English. He was, a big personality. Oh, he just loved people. He was effervescent, and he knew how to make business work, and he knew how to make connections, and he knew how to gamble, and he knew how to race horses, and he knew how to take a chance on something new happening. Ying He was the China doctor of John Day. Ying He was a quieter man, sort of a philosopher, a Buddhist, not as literate, not as well spoken, not as comfortable in English reading and writing as Long On, but a man of deep heart for people. They say he was so talented that he could touch your pulse and feel your ailments. They tell stories about how Ying He knew more about people than they knew about themselves. A story of one day he was feeling a woman's pulse and he said, "So you have 5 children?" And she said, "No, I have 4." And he goes, "No, you have 5." And the woman said, "Oh, I lost one." And somehow he knew that, just from the pulse. So Long On and Ying He were there in John Day just as the mining started to drop away and the Chinese presence, the Chinese mining presence and labor presence there started to dwindle. But they had served as a post office, a social club, labor brokers. They had made themselves a part of the Chinese community in the Chinatown there in John Day. And then they had also become instrumental to the greater community and to the Euro-American community. They were a great partnership, Long On and Ying He, because Long On knew how to bridge the cultures. And he could do the paperwork, and he could fill out the permits, and he could translate. And Ying He could heal. Now you don't think much about it, but there in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Western medicine wasn't always that secure, right? It's like, oh, that foot doesn't look good, let's cut it off. Right? Don't know what's wrong with you. Here, try this elixir. But when the people started to discover Ying He's talents, when he cured so many people from things that they had given up hope, when he could listen to their ailments and make a remedy for them, an herbal remedy for them, and prescribe it and send it by mail, they knew that they could count on him. They say that Ying He's hands were so delicate that he would not do any work with his right hand, so that he wouldn't form calluses on his fingers, so that they would stay so sensitive to the touch, right? And he never drove a horse and buggy, and he didn't drive a car, but Long On did, and they were partners together, and Long On would take Ying He out to the ranches, out and around into the region to do his healing. They tell a story of one of the famous ranchers there whose son was very ill and had gone septic from a wound. Western doctor had come and said, there's no hope. He's going to die. There's nothing I can do. And they called Ing He and had him come out, and Ing He stayed there for 6 days and 6 nights and sat with the boy. He applied hot stones and hot poultices and herbal teas, tinctures, right? Herbal remedies. And the boy revived. And that rancher was so grateful that he became a huge supporter of Ing He. Even as the Chinese community dwindled, Ing He and Lung An stayed there in John Day and were integral parts of the community. Ing He was a Mason. They say maybe it was because of some of the deep ceremonial rituals that enticed him also into that. But he was in the community. Lung An was a businessman. Lung An was a bootlegger during Prohibition. Both Ing He and Lung An contributed to the Grant County Bank during the Depression, when it looked like the bank was ready to fail. They went in and said, no, we'll keep our money here, we'll support it. And they lended out money to homesteaders to make sure that people could stay solvent. Those 2 men stayed in that community for their life. They contributed there and continue to be a huge part of the development and the texture of that place. Lung An died in 1940, right there inside the Kham Muay Chun. And he left all of his possessions, all of his estate, to his friend and partner, Ing He. Ing He stayed on there for another few years. His family, a nephew came to help out, maybe keep running the business, learn the medicine. And then he fell and broke his hip and was taken to Portland. Oh, you wouldn't go by ambulance. No, you said there's been too many people dead and dying in that ambulance. You take me by car over to Portland. Right. And then he died there in 1952. But they left a heritage. Lung An, he was the first car dealer east of the Cascade Mountains in Oregon. Right? He had the first car dealership. The Kham Muay Chun was the first building that had electricity and a telephone in the area. And they became friends with so many people and healed so many people and supported so many people in their friendship. When they came inside the Kham Muay Chun building, they found over $20,000 of uncashed checks under Ing He's bed. When people had asked him earlier about why didn't he cash these checks, he said, I don't need the money as much as they do. And so he just held on to them and never cashed. So I knew all of this as we're sitting at that bar. Can I take you back there again? I've just won $250 in my pocket. And I knew this about the Kham Muay Chun, and I knew this about Lung An and Ing He. But this fella that's sitting there, he says, yeah, my grandmother used to have a house right across the street. I said, oh yeah, really? Did you ever, like, go inside? And his eyes kind of sparkled. And he looked like a 13-year-old boy again. And he said, well, yeah, there was one time. One time I went around to the back and one of the doors was open. And I got inside. He said, wow, I'd never seen stuff like what was in there. It was amazing. It was just all kinds of stuff that it was just there on the shelves. You see, when Inge left and when his nephew left Kamwachung, they had just closed the door. And everything stayed there on the shelves. And in that dry climate, everything was preserved and nothing was moved. And this guy said, yeah, there's all these boxes of medicine and there's this Buddhist statue there and a little bed and a quilt on it and you know there's chopsticks on the table and these old dented up pots and I said, you know, did you ever like want to go back in there and like did you ever take any of it? Or, you know, like have your friends come and you could and he said, no. There was just something about that place that you didn't want to hurt it. You just wanted it to be like that. Yeah. And so it had stayed like that from the mid-50s until the city of John Day had taken it over and started looking at it and renovating it. And it became finally a state park on the historic register. But that kid didn't know it when he was 13. He just knew he just didn't want to hurt that place. He wanted it to stay like that. I looked at the fella and I said, so, you came back here, moved back from Bend. Were you here in February? That was February 2010. He said, oh, yeah, I was here. I said, can you tell me about that? What was that like? He said, oh, yeah, I remember that day. You see, in February of 2010, some folks from the Aryan Nation that had been located up in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, had come into John Day. They had walked into a realtor's office and said, we're looking to relocate. We want to make our national headquarters here in Grant County. And we think that this is our kind of place and our kind of people. And immediately, the phone lines began to buzz. The realtor called up everyone in her contact list, and the news spread that there were folks looking to buy. But the next morning, the people of John Day, they weren't looking to sell. They went out there to the corner, the four corners in the center of that town, and they stood there with signs that said, we stand united, united against hate. And the mayor of John Day came out and said, I don't know what kind of people you think we are, but we don't think you're our kind of people. And they didn't sell. It went to the Attorney General's office and was upheld. That Cook County did not need, was not mandated to sell. Yeah, said the fella, that was quite a day. There were 400 people out there on the corners that morning. We stand united, united against hate. Well, that was about the end of the beer. That was about the end of the evening, and Dale and I walked back to our room at the Best Western and settled in for the night. The next morning, we all got up, all of the people on the tour. We got up and we went over to the Interpretive Center for the Kanwachung Museum. And we all got our tickets and got lined up and get to go through the tour of the actual Mercantile building. Small groups at a time. Getting to see that and walk into that building that was 100 and almost 50 years of history sitting there, preserved, and people's connection to it. Then some of the folks on the tour, particularly 4 of the most elderly women on the tour, sisters, wanted to go up and see the grave sites of Inge and Langan. You know, you guys live around here, you know what it feels like in July at 10 o'clock in the morning walking uphill. Right? That cemetery in John Day sits up real high. But these women were determined that they were going to go there and they were going to honor those grave sites. They walked up the hill in that heat. Ceremonial to get up there. And there, in the middle of that cemetery, in a big space, with a marble cover over the grave sites, there were 2 headstones for Ing He, China doctor, and Long Leon, Langan. Beautiful sight. Looking out over that valley, looking out from that hillside. Those 2 men had often helped send other people's bones back to China, as was the tradition and the desire. But they had said they didn't want to be sent back to China, that this had been their home and this is where they would stay. And they were honored there in that cemetery. By contrast to so many of the grave sites that we saw in the rest of the tour that sat out as little sinkholes in the middle of sagebrush with some barbed wire maybe around them. Unnamed, unmarked, unknown. But there in John Day, those 2 graves have marble cover over the top of them in a prime spot, looking down from the hillside. We walked back down. We got on the bus. And of course, Dale Holmes said, "Tell the story. Tell them the story." A little pride, right? So I stood up in the front of the bus and I told the story of the dirty dogs. And Win. And told him the story of the young man who had gone in to Kanwachung when he was only a kid. And Betty Luke, one of the elder sisters who had gone up there to the gravesite, she was sitting in the front row, and Betty Luke looked up at me and said, "It's Langan and Ing He. It's their spirit in this town. We stand united against hate. It's because their spirit is still there and it still affects so many people in the community because of their long memories and their family histories, that it made that community what it is." So I walk away knowing this. And I say, there are no small lives. the things that we do, we are not always certain how they will ripple through time. And we can't always know the effect that our life may have 150 years later to the people who live in that place. I hope the story is adequate history and makes you interested in knowing more about the history and more of the facts.
That was wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? We have a little bit of time. I'll try and do my best.
I'm not going to question the archaeological thing in November, Society here in Bend, and had the director from them come down, and she said this, I don't know, last year or whatever, they found in the floor a ton of good brandy.
Yeah. Cases of it. Yeah. I'd read this too, and it says, boy, that's going to be some mellow whiskey after all of
It's
this.
a Chevrolet dealership. That was a
Yeah,
Chevrolet.
yeah, yeah. He was a car dealer. Yeah, Chevy.
Well,
Anything else? Anybody else?
Did they originally come over to do mining, or how did they end up in John Day, do you know?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't. Back me. I'm going to say something, Dylan. I don't know that they came over to be miners. I don't know that that was the intent. They came over for prosperity, to Gunsan, to Gold Mountain. You know, that was the belief. And remember that at that time in China, it was abject poverty, despair, you know, conflict. Like so many immigration stories. You don't know what you're going to do when you get there, but you know it's got to be better than what you're doing now. You know, that many times that I've told, and I told another program about Chinese pioneer in the West, you know, and I don't deal so much with confrontation, but with success stories, right? And time again, I hear that from all different ethnic groups, you know, going out, yeah, my grandparents were Italian, and the banks wouldn't give them a loan. You know, all kinds of groups, the Irish, all of them kind of go through that same thing. So I think they came over looking for opportunity, and they both were just ingenious, adventuresome kinds of personalities to say, okay, so what's needed here? What's the niche that I can fill? And I think especially Lamont he was smart, and he was a womanizer. Okay. He was a bit of a womanizer, and there's photographic evidence of this. Okay? And he bridged cultures to the point that he could even date white women, which would at that time would have just been basically unheard of. And yet he was accepted, and he just had this personality and effect that it was who he was. Does that kind of?
Yeah, sure.
And so I
just wondered how they ended up here, but they probably followed the gold rush.
Right, and Ying-Hei, I know Ying-Hei had uncles that were in Walla Walla, right? And so Ying-Hei and his father kind of went there first, and then his father was going back to China, and then Ying-Hei said, well, I'm going to go. I hear there's stuff down in, and so then he went to John Day.
John Day was the third largest Chinatown in America at this time.
At that time, because of the gold, because of the mining, and so that whole area, and mining was the hugest, the biggest effect. Dylan, anything to contribute in that?
Sounds right.
Sounds right. Thanks. My fact checker.
I think the nephew gave it to the community, and the Saturn closed for 30 years,
Yeah.
and one of the councilmen broke into it to see what they had. Oh.
I didn't know that, but the
Yeah,
councilman
yeah.
actually broke into it. I knew that it
For
had sat there
permission,
for
yeah,
decades.
the decision, what are we going to do about this? Because it started to go to the park and all.
Right. And it was deteriorating,
Right,
and
yeah.
you had to do something with this structure. Yeah.
But he built it strong, it's got concrete wire reinforced and everything.
Yeah, it's
Cowboy shit
block.
of the night.
Yeah, all block and the bottom, and then they had built an addition up on the second floor. It had bunk housing. It was just really the heart of the community there.
I'm new in the community. I hadn't heard of John Day, and I had in my mind I had thought of going over there. I'm going to make sure I go there. And I will think of you, and I will think of all of this when I go.
Thank you. Great. Yeah, that's the effect we're hoping for, right? You know, is that it makes you curious to learn more. Yeah,
I think in the gift store here, don't they sell the China Doctor?
possibly. I don't know.
That's a
You
good
have that book.
They might have, they probably have it in the Deschutes library system.
The
as
China
well.
Doctor.
But it talks
yeah.
all about some of the
Bartholomew,
stories.
I think is.
I don't remember.
Yeah, so you can read that. That will give you more background. There's information online about it, but really to feel it, yes, go to the site, go to the museum, and if you want to go up and visit the graves, that was the most touching to me. Like I said, it's such a contrast if you've done any other archaeological sorts of things and you've seen these other kind of lost graves and lost sites out on public lands, that you know there's a grave there, but it's just kind of off in the sagebrush, and you know, or even bigger cities. I mean, there's a cemetery there, but it's kind of nondescript a little bit and anonymous, sort of, and set aside. That was the other thing. Most of the Chinese graves would be set like in the worst corner possible of the property over here. And for these two men to be like, you know, centered and remarkable and just a part of that community really says a lot about them, you know, and their contribution to the community. And I think it says a lot about the community as well, to be open to them and learning from them and making friendships, you know. So their lives, you know, affected, I believe their lives affected clear up into the 21st century, into 2010. I have a real feeling that history kind of kept waving on because they affected so many people throughout the region, through a wide region, and that became family story, that became family legend of, oh yeah, when the China Doctor came out and he, you know, did this with your uncle, or they were building the roads, and during the flu epidemic, the influenza epidemic in 1918, right? And Bing He went up there and boiled up a pot of herbal remedy to keep everybody healthy, to keep the workers healthy so they could keep working and get the road finished, right? So all those things just kind of keep rippling through. And then if we tell our family stories, that's a little, you know, if we tell those family stories and pass those on, then they keep living and they go to the next generation and the next generation. And maybe that helps stretch our understandings and our tolerances when we talk about that and when we share those ideas. That was a paid political announcement.
Did you say the same gentleman was a Buddhist and a Mason?
Yes.
How did that work? I don't know.
You'll have to ask him.
Yeah.
But the information that I've read, and I never met Bing He.
Right.
He died 2 years before I was born, right? But you know, they say that he would perform ceremonies and rituals for people, Buddhist ceremonies and rituals for
It's
them.
amazing, we higher power, God.
Yeah.
That's all, it doesn't have to be the cool conceptualized Christian, Protestant, or Catholic, or
Right.
Yeah.
Buddhist wise, but Mason wise
Yeah,
seemed a
for
little
them to
less-
accept
Yeah.
being there.
And him to whatever.
And again, does that say something about the personalities that were all involved right about that time? And I think it gets back. I'm theorizing here without much context, but just a heart, that in small areas when there are big difficulties, you learn who you can count on. And a lot of the differences fall aside because the important thing is to take care of, right, a situation. And so I think partly because of Ing Hei's competency and his healing powers, and maybe partly because of his gentle nature, what I see as a gentle nature from him in the different stories, even though he's harsh and like said, one person, he goes, yeah, she's almost dead and now you bring her to me, you want me to make her well, right? So he could be frustrated. But I think maybe that is part of that acceptance, like why the Masons could go, oh yeah, we want you as part of our organization as well. Maybe, I'm just theorizing on that. And it makes me think of small towns I know up in Alaska, where everybody knows everybody, and you can't hide much about who you are because everybody knows everybody, and it's not going to last long if you're being fake, right? And you may not like that SOB, and you may not agree with some opinion that came up at the council meeting, right? But if it's your boat that's stuck on the sandbars, and that's the guy that comes to pull you off, you're going to be grateful, right? And vice versa. And so I think a lot of that, that's what it makes me think of, that in those situations, it's who you are as a person and what you contribute that counts. More than maybe what some of your, what do I want to say, your ideas or, your labels of things might not mean nearly as much as what it is you really put out there. That's a theory. That's my heart theory on that. Yeah.
I hope you're right.
I keep working for it, So, anything else, guys?
Thank you.
Mr. Kent? Thank you. Thanks, Phil.